thank you so much. I want to thank the Society for Counseling and Psychology for this amazing honor. It has been a game-changing experience for me to receive this award. I never expected it, actually. So I've put together a presentation here on why work matters. But the why work matters theme is going to be kind of the central line, forward line in this talk that's going to touch on different areas of my life, my thinking, my personal biography. So let me just begin by reading the paper. This is hopefully not going to be a dull paper because I wrote it in a very conversational, personal way. So I'll begin. So I'm deeply honored to speak about my journey from a humble background, growing up in a blue-collar family of modest means in Queens, New York, to receiving the Leona Award for a Lifetime Achievement in Counseling Psychology. I would like to begin by gratefully acknowledging my nominators for this award, including Mark Zavickas, who led this effort, Bob Lent, Naja Fuad, and Ryan Duffy. These colleagues and so many others across the decades have had faith in me, have offered wise counsel, intellectual inspiration, and friendship that has woven us together in a loving community of scholars who care about making a difference in people's lives. I also want to acknowledge the namesake of this award, Leona Tyler. The first book that I read in my master's program at Queens College was Tyler's brilliant and warm text, The Work of the Counselor. Although I never met Leona Tyler, I admired her path-breaking work in our field as one of the first strong women to serve as a leader within counseling psychology and also within APA when she was elected as president in 1973. Reviewing her biography in advance of this presentation, I learned that Leona Tyler served in several organizations outside of psychology, focused on peace and justice, setting the stage for the advocacy work that many of us hold so dear. So when I consulted with my friend Mark Zavickas about this presentation, he advised me to share my own biography and discuss how my life story has shaped my work. His view was in 20 years, people would want to know who I was, not what was I thinking about. So, because what I was thinking about is already out there. So I picked up on his idea. I thought it was a good idea. I also want to use this platform to explore a few issues that I think are essential for our field. Why work matters, and what are the next steps in psychology of working theory. My hope is that this presentation will help place the study of work clearly and passionately into the center of counseling psychology and psychology writ large. At the same time, I propose that our relationship with work needs some repair from both personal and professional perspectives, which I will discuss at the close of the presentation. Now I'm going to discuss the more personal perspective of why work matters. To understand why I've devoted most of my life to studying work and to developing critical theories to understand and advance a social justice vision of work, I would like to establish a biographical perspective about my life. And I will begin with both of my parents, Harry Blustein and Janet Schwartzman. This is their wedding photo from March 1945. They got married on a Wednesday night, which has to do with not having a lot of resources. They came from immigrant families. Each of their parents were born in either Poland or Russia and came to the US during the large-scale Eastern European migration of Jewish people to the United States in the early part of the 20th century. Their parents were poor and struggling hard to get to the working class and faced considerable stresses that sadly characterizes the lives of immigrants across the globe and the eons as people seek to start their lives new in often unwelcoming environments. After my father's service as an aircraft mechanic during World War II in the Pacific Theater, my parents started a family and their work lives in New Jersey. Alas, my sister Irene, who was born in 1947, faced major intellectual and developmental disabilities, which resulted in her not being able to speak or understand much language, culminating in her being placed in residential settings where she could receive care from professionals. Irene's placement in state facilities and then group homes was a challenge for our entire family, one that shaped our identity and compassion for those on the margins. Along with being Irene's brother, I'm also currently her guardian. She's currently living in a group home where she seems to be enjoying her life with her caregivers and housemates. Irene has provided me with an opportunity to pay my life forward by taking care of her and ensuring that she has as high a quality of life as possible. My brother Rich was born following Irene, and I then arrived a few years later. My brother and I had an amazing sibling relationship that was cut short in 2017 when he died from multiple myeloma, a blood cancer, after a courageous struggle of 8 years. My brother and I shared a room for our entire childhood and adolescence. I know it's unheard of now, but we did. However, we shared more than that. We shared a deep and abiding love for our parents, for each other, and the capacity to make each other laugh and see the lightness of life even amidst some dark times. The relational context of my life also includes my current nuclear family, framed by my loving and brilliant partner, Lisa Thayer, who's here in the back. Between us, we have 6 daughters and 6 grandchildren. We've been blessed to have an opportunity to forge a family and a relational life that is rich in love and caring, and to begin a loving relationship in midlife, to begin a new life anew. We're very fortunate that my daughter, Michelle, and her family are here today. If Michelle, if you could raise your hand, and could Tuvia and Shimi, Yitzi, and Kumi, please raise your hands. There you go. Thank you all for attending this presentation. It means a lot. So now we'll go to the beginnings of the psychology of working. This earliest rumblings of psychology of working began in my early childhood, as my family of origin struggled in gaining a foothold in the labor market. My father's trade was as a sheet metal mechanic, and his hope after World War II was to get a job with a commercial airline. Working in aviation was my father's passion, although frankly, I do not think that he particularly loved repairing metal. His was a trade that was chosen based on family tradition, where he learned this craft and what was available. For my father and so many others, working was primarily about survival, and meaning was derived from the satisfaction of supporting oneself and one's family. Following my father's discharge from the military in 1946, he applied for a job in the growing commercial aviation industry. He took an exam, which he thought he did well on. He was very bright, my dad. However, he did not receive any feedback after completing his application. He went back to the personnel office, and they told him that he did very well on the test, that he had great experience, but they had taken enough of quote unquote his kind, which was not the first time that my family's aspirations were cut down by anti-Semitism. He then worked as a sheet metal mechanic for the federal government as a private employee at an Air Force base, eking out a barely subsistence living for 14 years until he finally got a job with Pan American at the age of 46 in 1960. At that point, we moved from Florida to New York and lived in the Bronx, where I spent most of my late childhood and my adolescence. So my first exposure to the question of why work matters was during my childhood, as I witnessed my father working 3 jobs, including his 20-year stint in the Air Force Reserves post-World War II, and my mother doing her best to take care of my brother and me while managing the reality of Irene's disability. My initial exposure to work was framed around its integral connection to survival. Fortunately, we did not experience food or housing insecurity. However, we did not have resources for such luxuries as an air conditioner while we lived in South Florida for 4 years. Once my father started to work for Pan Am, I could see how he felt a sense of identification with his trade and the aviation industry, and how he experienced accomplishment and the satisfaction of supporting our family. In addition to my father's struggles, I was also struck by the challenges of some of our neighbors and family members who were hampered in their work lives by marginalization, lack of education and social capital, and by intergenerational poverty. As soon as my brother and I were able to manage on our own, my mother took a job at a local department store where she sold cosmetics. My mother was beloved by all who worked with her and who she served, and she found meaning in her relationships that she had there and in helping customers find affordable products. She really felt proud of that she said that people would come to see her because she would help them find the best cosmetics at a low price. So she was very proud of it. My brother's trajectory at work offered yet more lessons in why work matters. He completed a BA degree in the early 1970s and did not have a clear idea of what he wanted to do. He ended up taking jobs that were available to him and did not pursue a work life of meaning until he was well into his middle-aged years. In fact, he had so many jobs and I had so few that he said, you shouldn't be writing all these books about work, I should. I had 5 jobs since you were 22. So I have had a privileged experience, which I'll talk about, but he did not. So he spent most of his earlier work life as a computer programmer until he lost his job in the recession that followed the 9/11 tragedy. He was then not able to obtain another programming job due to rapid changes in the field. And he had to start over again, first as a school bus driver, and then finally as a special ed teacher, which is what he enjoyed doing, and particularly in teaching history, which he loved. The final work-related coup de grace for my brother was when he contracted multiple myeloma, and he discovered that he could not keep his job as a teacher unless he stood up in the classroom, which was not viable given the way in which multiple myeloma drained him of so much strength. Early in my life, I began to understand the concept of career choice privilege and privilege more broadly, as I was able to navigate my way into the PhD program in counseling psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University, after obtaining considerable postmaster's experience in college counseling, despite a number of early disappointments in my doctoral applications. The other factor that helped me to gain admission to a strong doctoral program was my decision to publish journal articles on my own as a master's level counselor. I was successful in publishing 5 articles on practice-oriented ideas, none of which became a citation classic in any way. In fact, if somebody cites them now, I'm thinking, really? Like, cited this article? Except that they were classics for me in their capacity to open doors that had been closed. The narrative that I have shared may seem to foreground individual agency. However, I was consistently able to rely on my family and friends who provided me with clear evidence that much of our sense of agency is indeed relational. Moreover, this part of my biography also reflects the intersection of various social identities, privileges, and sources of marginalization. The notion of career privilege for me includes my white, male, cisgender identities, which clearly opened doors that were shut for many people and many of my peers. The fact that I was a first-generation college student without many contacts in higher education or psychology and academia was certainly a barrier. Yet my privileged identities were operating at both overt and covert levels to compensate in part for my social class and related social capital struggles. The awareness of these privileges has been essential for me in my journey to become a critical scholar and a psychologist who has and continues to seek to change discourses, theories, practices, and ultimately public policies. So now I'm going to move into the development of the ideas of psychology of working. I also had other influences that shaped my journey to developing social justice-informed perspectives and theory. As an adolescent who came of age in the late 1960s, early 70s, I was immersed both in the civil rights and anti-war movements, each of which were very necessary and inspiring. Into that mix was the politicized rock and folk music of the era, and my reading of critical literature on racial issues, such as the autobiography of Malcolm X and class-based critiques of capitalism. While I was an undergraduate at Stony Brook University, I began to write primarily rock music criticism. These were my first publications, actually, which opened new social and cultural doors as well as shaped my writing skills. After completing my undergraduate studies, I obtained a master's degree in counseling from Queens College and worked at 3 different colleges where I learned in the New York City area, and it culminated in one particular job that I worked at for 4 years at Rockland Community College, which was basically where I learned about integrating social justice, career and work, and counseling. I had amazing leaders, inspirational social justice advocates there, and that job transformed me totally. After completing my doctoral training, I started my academic career at the University of Albany. I was fortunate to have amazing mentors, including Dick Hayes, Sue Phillips, and Mickey Freelander. I then continued with a program of research that I had begun in my dissertation, which was supervised at Teachers College by Peter Cairo and Jean-Pierre Jourdain, by investigating career exploration, identity formation, career decision-making, and other traditional issues in vocational psychology. By the mid-1990s, something wasn't quite right in my sense of what I was examining in my research. After a period of reflection, I decided to investigate the school-to-work transition for non-college bound youth, which included interviewing people at car washes, which included a great collaboration with Sue Phillips. This research on non-college bound youth brought me into direct and emotionally evocative contact with people whose work lives were full of shadows and darkness, which clearly did not reflect the personal environment Fit Dreams of John Holland, or the self-concept implementation model of Donald Super. I was then able to connect the dots between my life experience and my hope to create knowledge that would make a difference for those whose work lives were primarily focused on survival. So now let's talk about the specific origin story of psychology of working. By the late 1990s, I was mulling over the idea of developing a new perspective and theory, psychology of working. Several influences shaped my thinking in this area. First, I was deeply influenced by Mary C. Richardson's groundbreaking article in 1993 entitled Work in People's Lives, published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology. And in that article, which included so many important social justice, racial justice, and gender justice ideas, was this idea of her critiquing the careerist perspective in vocational psychology and her argument for a focus on work. And so that influenced me powerfully. The second influence was a book that came out in 1997 by William Julius Wilson entitled When Work Disappears. This sociologically informed study described in this book is accounted for the impact of the loss of stable work in urban communities of color within Chicago, creating a clear map about why work matters and how the loss of work can contribute to disruptions in one's psychological well-being, family life, community cohesion, and indeed the very fabric of existence. In addition to these two groundbreaking contributions, I was influenced by the emerging critiques of the male, middle class, and white biases of career development by such scholars as Lenore Harmon, Nancy Betts, Nadja Fuad, Ruth Fassinger, Elsie Smith. They're amazing people whose work made a profound impact on me, Janet Helms, Charles Warnath, and others who had the vision to insist on a more inclusive vocational psychology. Another important contextual factor was my move from the University at Albany to Boston College in 1999. The move to Boston College felt like a major kickstart to psychology of working. The BC faculty were already on a pathway to be leaders in social and racial justice, and I felt like I was coming into this community during the beginning of the program's story. My goal was to offer a socio-political critique of traditional career development with the ultimate intention of developing a new perspective and new theory. In considering how I would frame this work, I thought about how two major theorists presented their new ideas to our field. I think this is a big reveal in this presentation because I don't think anybody knows this part of psychology of working. As you will see from the slide, each of these innovative scholars, Ann Rowe and Donald Super, named their perspectives, first the psychology of occupations, then the psychology of careers. So perhaps with a bit of overconfidence or a simple aspiration to make a difference, I decided to call this new initiative Psychology of Working, which was launched in the 25th anniversary issue of the Journal of Vocational Behavior in 2001. I then embarked on writing a book to create the intellectual and social justice infrastructure of this new perspective, which was published in 2006. Writing this book was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. While it took a long time to put the pieces together, this book sought to change our field, and in doing so, it changed my life in ways I'm still learning about. I don't think I would be here if I had not written the book. So I'm going to review some of the core concepts of psychology of working. Some of you know them. I'm not going to repeat them in the academic way. I'm going to do this again in a more personal way. So the Psychology of Working book provided a strong argument for a radical vision of vocational and counseling psychology, one that was informed by liberation psychology, emancipatory communitarian thinking, and a social justice value system. Within 10 years of the publication of this book, my colleagues and I developed a more precise theoretical statement, Psychology of Working theory. The origin story of this transition to a precise theoretical model began in Coimbra, Portugal in 2014 during a Society for Vocational Psychology conference where my former student and friend Ryan Duffy, who's in the back here, met with me at a poolside at my hotel on a beautiful day that was replete with this amazing blue sky of Portuguese summers. Maybe I was in a great mood there. I know, well, Ryan pitched the idea of let's take what you've written and develop it into a linear theory. And if initially I had resisted the idea, but on this particular day I said, yes, let's go for it. I had the distinct pleasure of meeting Ryan when he was an undergraduate at Boston College in the early 2000s. He was either 18 or 19 when he approached me in my office and stated he wanted to be a vocational psychologist. Those of you who are vocational psychologists know that that's a very rare experience. So Ryan's hope was to develop a psychology of working theory model that would drive empirical and especially quantitative research. We collaborated with another former student of mine, Matt Deemer, and Kelsey Autan, who is here. Kelsey's right here. And that article came out in 2016, and at that point, PWT really took off. So how can PWT inform our consideration of the question of why work matters? Let me just go over some of the main tenets of PWT here. At its best, working has the capacity to fulfill several fundamental needs that are integral to being alive in the world. On the flip side, of course, work can frustrate our strivings to lead a decent life, expose us to harassment, abuse, and violence, denigrate our spirit and soul, and ultimately damage our mental and physical health. In addition, people need resources to survive, and work has been our go-to way to ensuring survival. Some people, of course, are now critiquing this universal connection between work and survival, and I'll be addressing that a little bit here and later in this article I'll write from this talk. Another critical point is that people also need social connections to experience a meaningful and rewarding life. And work, given its embeddedness with the social and economic world, provides a major venue for people to connect with others. Also, people need to engage in authentic, motivating, and meaningful activities that will foster our sense of self-determination. Furthermore, another innovation that we came up with in our PWT model our article was the infusion of the International Labor Organization's concept of decent work. And Ryan, I do think this was my idea, wasn't it? The decent work one? This one I was really devoted to because I thought that here was this multinational organization developing this concept of decent work, and we should connect to this. Psychology is too insular, all the reasons that we talk about. So we use this concept of decent work, we've operationalized it, and it's become a key aspect of what we do. Additionally, the foregrounding of the macro level economic factors of economic constraints and marginalization is key to PWT and reflects the clear acknowledgement that working lives are shaped and too often constrained by external forces. Another important attribute of the initial formulation of PWT, as reflected in my 2006 book, includes ideas that are increasingly relevant to counseling and vocational psychology, such as critical consciousness and relational theories. These ideas continue to define PWT and clearly reflect initiatives that have impacted across boundaries and conceptual frameworks. Finally, PWT is inherently a theory of change. The goal is to develop ideas, practices, and policy advice that foster changes which will create work contexts that are supportive, fair, dignified, and equitable. Moreover, PWT is deeply committed to anti-racism work and embodies the need to combat white supremacy and other forms of oppression that continue to plague communities and nations across the globe. So let's think more about this question of why work matters from a PWT lens. PWT does provide some interesting ways of considering this issue of why work matters. In short, some people work primarily for survival and others experience more work volition, developing work lives that may offer purpose and meaning. So the question of why work matters really needs to be answered in a contextual way. I propose that the way in which work matters intersects with privilege and marginalization, creating disparate pathways to understanding why and how work matters in our lives. In short, people who are primarily focused on work as a means for survival may have a very different experience of work than people who are able to prioritize self-determination, in large measure because their survival needs are met more easily by work or by personal resources. So now I would like to move into this question of what are the next steps for PWT? And at my heart, I love to try to create new ideas. So I've been percolating these ideas for the last few years, so I'll kind of talk about them here. So PWT is ultimately a dynamic theory. We do hope to kind of create changes in this theory as we go along. So I'm going to review a few of the points that I've been interested in. Career choice privilege. So I've been using this term career choice privilege for years without much elaboration or discussion about its meaning or impact. In a sense, career choice privilege is related to work volition, but I think it's a more politicized and psychologically deeper concept. In reading a recent book by the relational psychoanalyst Neil Altman entitled White Privilege, which my friend Dan Mahoney, who was here, recommended, and we had a little book group conversation about it this summer, I learned more about the dynamic interaction between those with privilege and those without privilege. As Altman noted in discussing white privilege, he stated that since the underlying social structure is dominant/submissive, there must be an other who is unprivileged, underprivileged, deprived of money and political power, so that white people can know and feel that they are privileged. It's the end of the quote. So here's my question. To what extent are similar dynamics at play in career choice privilege? How does career choice privilege shape people's political views without privilege? People's views in general about those without privilege. We know that the American dream narrative and related myths about people pulling themselves up from their bootstraps is a common, although thankfully much critiqued, perspective. So in expanding the purview of PWT, perhaps it would be useful to apply a critical and relational lens to fully understanding the nature and impact of career choice privilege. The second point is about precarity. In recent years, I've become very interested in the socio-political and psychological notion of precarity. We know that work precarity plays a major role in PWT-informed inferences and ideas. However, the broader literature on precarity, which I've been kind of consumed with for the last 6 months, has important implications as well. My colleagues and I define precarity as an overriding state of vulnerability, insecurity, lack of power and agency, and at times existential threat. Further deepening the perspective on precarity, Michelle Fine described precarity as, quote, an elegant social psychological construct, a dynamic, not a variable, spawned promiscuously at the person-environment membrane. I think Michelle Fine is the greatest academic writer currently. I mean, that's just one sentence as an example of how to be a creative writer in academia. If we consider working context from a more deeply socio-political perspective as reflected in precarity, we are one step closer to ensuring that PWT becomes a more active theory of change, and one that will link marginalization and economic constraints with structural inequities, racism, and other pervasive barriers. The third area that I'm interested in is dignity at work. Human dignity, as defined by Isaac Prudetensky, refers to, quote, the feelings of being recognized, acknowledged, included, and respected for who we are and for what we know. Dignity is particularly important at work given the inherent power hierarchies that exist in organizations and work relationships. I believe that we need to expand how we understand relevant conditions of work by infusing dignity alongside with decency and other social and psychological factors such as satisfaction and well-being. So let's speak now about some of the policy implications of my 35 or 40 years of this work. I'm not summarizing in one slide. Obviously, I'm not doing it justice, but just to give you a thumbnail sketch of what I've been thinking about. We return to this question of why work matters now from a systemic and policy perspective. Yes, it is true that working has many limitations and inherent problems, not the least of which is the loss of agency in our lives and the exposure to the ills of society via joining systems where we lose control and often lose our sense of dignity. As AI continues to evolve and impact the world of work, we may be faced with rapid and transformative changes in the labor market and in the fundamental nature of working. Many labor experts predict that some jobs will be replaced by AI, while others believe that AI may help to create new jobs. My sense is that it's very hard to predict how these trends will take shape. However, I argue that we need to foreground human rights, dignity, and freedom from want as we consider policies that will support the work lives of everyone who works and who wants and needs to work. And based on a lot of the research and theorizing that we've done in PWT, these are some policy implications that my colleagues and I have been putting forward. One is basic and sustainable income guarantees, which I think are critical. We need to ensure that people are also fairly paid for their work. The existence of such massive poverty in the US and in many regions of the world, which has been described beautifully in a recent book by Matthew Desmond entitled Poverty by America, is immoral and needs to be changed. In Desmond's view, they need to be changed with tools that are already available to us, such as raising wages, empowering unions, and actually collecting the taxes that the wealthy are required to pay. Create workplaces that do not tolerate white supremacy and that unpack work from colonial influences. This is an essential step in creating dignified and decent work for all. Develop and implement labor policy that works for everyone, including guaranteed jobs for all, and providing legitimate resources, pay, and retirement benefits for workers, both paid and unpaid. So I want to go over two other points, okay? First question is this question of what are the personal ramifications of why work matters? Are people thinking about this from a broader intellectual perspective? So there's been a preoccupation with work. A lot of us have this preoccupation as a means of survival, but also as a means of creating a livelihood and a lifestyle that has been thoughtfully critiqued by people and by scholars and working people, particularly during the pandemic. And one manifestation was the Great Resignation, which of course had many causes and manifestations. But one of the common issues was people questioned this idea of why are we working so much? As people began to deal more openly with the existential questions that emerged in the early days of the pandemic, work seemed a lot less important. The advent of some temporary forms of universal basic income as reflected in stimulus payments and extended unemployment benefits certainly raised the conversation to an even more fundamental level. If we could manage survival without work, why would people work? Particularly those whose work lives were denigrating, uninteresting, and meaningless. In my view, the pandemic facilitated a more open discussion about why we work that will continue as we move into this period of AI and changes in the labor market. As a reflection of the critique of work, I'm going to refer you to a column by Helen Olin from the Washington Post. And the column's title was fantastic, How the Pandemic Ended America's Bad Romance with Work. I was fortunate to be one of her sources. We spoke for like an hour and a half, and it was an incredible interview. And these were two of the quotes she used, which I think were useful in trying to think about, why people are so focused on work. One was maybe the poor safety net really kept people from working. Maybe the poor safety net really kept people from analyzing the role of work in their lives. And the second one was maybe the American work ethic was really a form of survival, which is an important reframe, I think. So now let me move into my closing thoughts. I want to speak directly now and openly to my colleagues in counseling and vocational psychology about an issue that has been troubling me and troubling many people for quite a while. It has to do with the relationship between counseling and vocational psychology. Counseling psychology has had a long and deep commitment to understanding and intervening in the work lives of clients and communities. The scholarship and advocacy work in vocational psychology has clearly been transformed in the past few decades, with the clearest manifestation of these changes evident in the popularity of ideas from PWT, critical consciousness, anti-racism work, intersectionality, critiques of capitalism, advocacy about the role of labor unions, and many other relevant issues. Yet I have a sense that the integration of vocational psychology and counseling psychology is not well articulated. The reasons for this growing distance are complex and may reflect a variety of issues that have been reshaping our work. However, I think that there's a collusion to not talk about the distance. Like all long-term relationships, talking about issues in a caring and empathic way is critical in sustaining connection. So with these comments in mind, in a lot of humility, and I'm taking a bit of a risk here, let me share a few impressions and solutions to this distance that a number of us feel. Returning to the prevailing question that has framed this presentation, I hope I've made a clear case for why work matters and how it matters. Using the social and racial justice lens of PWT and other transformative positions in vocational psychology, we have developed a far more inclusive view of work that is consistent with the mission of counseling psychology. Work is a theater of life, and in our working lives, we can experience both dreams and disappointments. The reasons why so many people face a work life of hardship and despair are inextricably connected to the same core issues that are central now in counseling psychology: racial injustice, poverty, capitalism, and sexism, to name just a few constraining factors that can create structural inequity. I think another major issue facing us is that career development is often viewed as reifying theories that are framed around career choice privilege. The recent literature in vocational psychology has clearly broken out of that constraining mission. As a reflection of these changes, I urge you to read the invited papers that Ryan Duffy curated during his tenure as the editor of Journal of Career Assessment, which is an amazing collection of invited papers, which collectively point to the way toward a more inclusive and justice-oriented vision for vocational psychology that has the capacity to change how we view work as a context and as a content area. So how do we move forward in repairing some of these ruptures? One is to, integrate work issues into our conversations, into our research, training, and practice on social and racial justice issues. Also, we need to build on the strong work by such theorists as Donna Schultheis, who was here, and Mary Sue Richardson, among others, who've created frameworks for integrating work-based and mental health treatments. I suggest that we create more intentional collaborations between vocational psychologists on projects devoted to the interface of anti-racism work and work that focuses on work per se. And I have advice from my vocational psychology colleagues on this issue as well. We need to do a better job of advocating for ourselves. Our colleagues may bemoan having to offer a career class in a doctoral or master's program. We need to actively assert the importance of our work and indicate how it's centrally critical to an activist and justice-oriented training program in professional psychology. It's not our fault clinical psychologists don't study this. We should continue to do it and do a great job with it. So finally, returning to the themes of why work matters in my own life journey, I would like to conclude by sharing my hopes and deep sense of gratitude. First, I hope that my remarks have given you a sense of how my biography is integrated into the creative process of scholarship. I'm not necessarily advocating for a me-search type of approach to research and program development. Rather, I suggest that we look at our own unresolved sources of pain and other life themes, to the questions we ask, to our orientation, to our professional life, and in our commitment to serving others. These work themes can provide the connective tissue between the peaks and valleys of a work life. Second, I want to underscore the deep sense of gratitude I feel about this award. For me, it was unexpected and also deeply gratifying. To be seen and recognized is a core aspect of being alive, and I hope that we can feel renewed in ensuring that we recognize everybody who works, regardless of who they are and what they do. There are many people who have made this journey with me, including many of you in this audience. My family, students, close friends, and colleagues have been such a source of joy and inspiration. I would like to first acknowledge, and I'm not going to acknowledge most of my wonderful friends, but I will talk briefly about a friend and my partner. I'd like first to acknowledge my dear friend Gali Cinnamon from Tel Aviv University, who is here. She listened to a draft of this presentation. I didn't want to read it to anyone first. I was a little bit hesitant, and she stayed at our house for the last few days, and I read it to her on Tuesday, and she gave me great feedback. So thank you, Gali, and thank you for being part of my life. I also want to acknowledge publicly the great gift of love from my wife, Lisa Thayer. Lisa, you are my best friend, confidant, and my wonderful collaborator in life. Our love is an oasis of peace, love, and understanding, one that has made it possible for us to be the best version of ourselves. And clearly has helped me to create some of this work. So thank you, Lisa, and thank you to our family. And finally, I will end as I began, which is thinking back to my parents and their struggles. I want to end by recognizing and honoring them. They lived quiet and unassuming lives, but their kindness and strength have inspired me to make a difference for those on the margins. And so in closing, I thank each of you for being part of this presentation, and more than that, for being part of my life. Thank you very much.